Good evening, Miss Deborah. How are you? Happy Monday. Oh, excuse me. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for joining me today. Can everyone hear me all right? Give me like a thumbs up or something. You took a nap to try and stay awake. Well, even if you end up falling asleep, Miss Deborah, you know where to find me. So when you wake up, I'll probably still be here. For any of you who are not any of my regulars, welcome. Hello. You have stumbled upon a book reading this evening. And as you can tell from my background, this is what we're reading from. And we are currently in the third book of the quartet, and we're probably a bit more than halfway done with that story by now, I think. I'm trying to judge by the amount of pages I have left. So, but just in case you have missed either, excuse me, last week's reading or any of the other readings in the past, or any of the other books that I have finished reading, you can actually find those on my YouTube channel. So you can access that through my bio here on TikTok. And I've got everything listed in sequential order for you, so you don't have to try and fuss around and figure out which video to play next, because I've got that all taken care of for you. But I'm glad you're here now. If you're returning, welcome back. And if you're here for the first time, welcome. So we do book readings every Monday, well, with some exceptions. We do book readings every Monday from 8 to 9-ish, sometimes 9:15, sometimes 9:30. There was actually one time I think I did a 2-hour kind of finale reading. That was a lot of reading. My eyeballs were really tired after that particular read. That was a long read, but normally it's about an hour. Hello everyone who's just joining in. Hello. So yeah, we typically read for about an hour, and we'll get through maybe 4-5 chapters depending on the size of the chapters. So, but we are reading from this book series this time around, and I know it looks like a lot. Like this is a thick book. But keep in mind there are 4 different stories in here. There are 4 individual stories. So if you are not necessarily a big reader or a strong reader or an avid reader, I know books like this can look intimidating, but trust me, this is very easy reading. This is very, well, I'd say that the subject matter is kind of light reading. Like there's nothing really terribly traumatic in here, I don't really think. But so if you're someone who's looking for just like a good casual read, books like this, series like this one are very good to just kind of hop back into reading, something that's easy to pick up, something that's easy to put down. The chapters are not long at all, so even if you've only got 10-15 minutes, that's at least 1 chapter, maybe 2 if you're a fast reader. But well, I think there was only 1 chapter in here that was like 2 pages long, so. But anyway, we typically get started at about 5 after. It gives everyone a chance to get logged in and settled with their favorite drink and in their favorite comfy jammies. Or get ready to make dinner or whatever. Whatever you guys do while you're listening to me read to you. Oh. Last week I was drinking soda. That was a mistake too. Never try and read and drink soda. It's not a good combination. All right. So we're at 8:05. We're going to go ahead and get started. And for anybody who's following along, if you happen to have this book and you just want to follow along with me, we're in book 3, so that's Messenger, and we are on chapter 19. Night was ending, and they were still alive. Maddie woke at dawn to find himself still curled next to Kira in the place where they had collapsed together after struggling as far as they could into the evening. Kira? His voice was hoarse from thirst, but she heard him and stirred. She opened her eyes. I can't see very well, she whispered. Everything is blurred. Can you sit up? He asked. She tried and groaned. I'm so weak, she said. Wait. She took a deep breath and then painfully pushed herself into a sitting position. What's that on your face? She asked him. He touched his upper lip where she pointed and brought his hand away smeared with bright blood. My nose is bleeding, he said, puzzled. She handed him the cloth she had worn around her face the day before, and he held it against his nose to try to stem the flow of blood. Do you think you can walk? He asked her after a moment, but she shook her head. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Maddie. He wasn't surprised. After the thorny branches had shredded her dress, they had reached for her legs as night fell, and now he could see that she was terribly lacerated. The wounds were deep, and he could see exposed muscles and tendons glisten yellow and pink in a devastating kind of beauty where the ragged flesh gaped open. Maddie himself could probably still stumble along, but his arms were completely useless now, and his hands seemed no more than huge paws. He could no longer even hold the knife with any strength. As for Frolic, he didn't know. The little dog lay motionless against his chest. He watched dully as a brown lizard with a darting tongue scrambled across their blanket with its tail flicking. You go on, Kira murmured. She lay back down and closed her eyes. I'll just sleep. He moved his bandaged arms with some difficulty to her pack, which lay beside her where she had dropped it the night before. Through a haze of pain, he realized that his fingers still moved awkwardly at his will, and he used them to open her pack and remove the embroidery frame. Painstakingly, slowly, he threaded her needle. Then he shook her awake. Don't. I don't want to wake up. Kira, he said to her, take this. He handed her the frame. Just try one more time. Please. See where Leader is, if you can. She blinked and looked at the frame as if it were unfamiliar. Maddie put the needle into her right hand. He was remembering something. It was something he had said once to Leader about meeting halfway. But she had closed her eyes again. He spoke loudly to her. Kira! Put the needle into the fabric and try to meet him. Try, Kira. Kira sighed, and with a feeble gesture, she inserted the needle into the cloth as he held the frame for her. He watched her hands. Nothing happened. Nothing changed. Again, he implored. He saw her hands flutter, and the shimmer came. Leader felt Forrest's attack begin when he was 2 days in. Probably it had started earlier with sharp twigs. He remembered now that one had barely missed his eye, but he had been so intent then on finding and following the path that he had not paid attention to the little wounds inflicted on him. He had strode through the deep woods with no thought of danger. He concentrated only on finding the pair that he had seen so close to death. He didn't eat or sleep. He had begun to perceive the stench on the morning of the second day, and it served to hurry his steps. Without flinching, he brushed aside the grasping branches and ignored the thorns that scraped his arms and face. He encountered a place where the path seemed simply to end. He stopped, puzzled, and examined the undergrowth. From somewhere nearby, a shiny green frog emerged from the base of a bush. Chirrump, chirrump. It hopped and skittered toward him in the mud, then turned itself around and bent and went forward. To his surprise, Leader followed the frog, pushing his way through thick bushes, and found that it had led him to the place where the path resumed. Relieved, for he had thought briefly that he was lost, he continued on. But now he recognized the attacks. Now he saw that it was not random thorny branches and his own clumsiness in walking into them, but rather an assault from forest itself. Suddenly, the air surrounding him was abuzz with stinging insects. They flew at his face and bit mercilessly. He remembered, from his reading, the descriptions of besieged medieval castles, and armies of men with bows sending so many arrows that the sky seemed thick with them. This felt like that. He felt pierced in 1,000 places, and he cried out. Then, just as suddenly, they were gone. Regrouping, he thought, for another attack. He rushed forward, thinking to move away from this swampy area which harbored and bred such creatures. Indeed, the path did turn and led to drier ground, but here a sharp rock flung itself up and split the skin on his knee, and then another sliced his hand so badly that he had to wrap the cut tightly in cloth for fear the loss of blood would weaken him beyond repair. Stumbling and bleeding, he wished briefly that he had brought some kind of weapon, but what would have protected him against forest itself? It was a force too huge to fight with a knife or a club. Our gifts are our weaponry, he remembered saying to the blind man. It seemed so long ago that he had said it. He had felt certain of it at that time, but now he could not even think what he had meant. He stood silently for a moment. His face was disfigured now, swollen from bites that oozed a dark fluid. Blood ran from his left ear, which had been gashed by a razor-sharp stone. One of his ankles was entangled by a vine that grew so quickly he could see it move, snaking its way toward his knee. He knew he would soon be immobilized by it, and the insects would return then to finish him off. He faced what he knew to be the center of forest, the place where Maddie and Kira were trapped, and he willed himself to look beyond. It seemed the only thing left to do. Chapter 20. "What are you seeing?" Maddie asked her in a hoarse voice. But she didn't reply at first. Her eyes were closed. Her fingers moved as if in a dream. The needle went in and out, in and out. He lifted his head to try to see, but his eyes were swollen, and when he raised himself, blood still flowed from his nose. So he lay back down, groaning from the effort, and in doing so felt the limp body of the puppy shift inside his shirt. Maddie had never experienced such an enormous sadness. His other dog had died of old age, peaceful and ready, but Frolic was only a puppy, new to life, and had been such a spirited creature, so curious and playful. It seemed impossible that he would have become a lifeless thing in such a short time. But it was true of everything, he thought. His sadness was for all of it. For Village, no longer the happy place it had been. For Kira, no longer the sturdy, eager young woman he had always known. And Leader? He wondered what was happening to Leader now. Suddenly, Kira seemed to come awake. She whispered, "He's coming. He's close." Her voice was right beside him, very near to Maddie's ear as he lay curled next to her. But it sounded, at the same time, far away, as if she were moving someplace distant. The vine around his ankle tugged at him, bit into his flesh, anchored itself there, and sent a new shoot upward. Another snaked itself out of the bushes and curled around his foot. Leader didn't notice. He stood immobile, alert. His eyes were open, but he was no longer seeing the vermin-ridden trees around him, their blighted leaves, or the foul, dark mud under his feet. He was looking beyond, and he was seeing something beautiful. "Kira," he said, though it was his mind that spoke, for his human voice was inaudible now, and his mouth was painfully swollen with open sores. "We need you," she replied, and it was her mind speaking too. Maddie, beside her, heard nothing but the soft flutter of her fingers moving on the fabric. In the place called Beyond, Leader's consciousness met Kira's, and they curled around each other like wisps of smoke in greeting. "We are wounded," she told him, "and lost." I am hurt too, and captured here, he replied. With the exchange, they drifted dangerously apart. Where he stood, Leader could feel the vine now. His knee buckled as the sharp-toothed stem bit. He tried to reach for it, but his hands were entangled too. With great effort, his consciousness touched hers again. Ask the boy for help, he told her. Do you mean Maddie? Yes, though it is not his true name. Tell him we need his gift now. Our world does. Maddie felt Kira stir beside him. She opened her eyes. He watched as her tongue moved to moisten her blistered lips. When she spoke, her voice was so weak that he could not make out the words. With difficulty, he leaned painfully toward her, so that his ear was near her mouth. We need your gift, she whispered. Maddie fell back in despair. He had followed Leader's instructions. He had not spent the gift. He had not made Raymond well, had not fixed Kira's crooked leg, or even tried to save his little dog. But it was too late now. His body was so damaged he could barely move. He could no longer bend his ravaged arms. How could he place his hands on anything? And what, in any case, did she want him to touch? So much was ruined. In agony and hopelessness, he turned away from her and rolled off the blanket and into the thick, foul-smelling mud. With his arms outstretched, his hands touched the earth. He lay there waiting to die. He felt his fingers begin to vibrate. Anyone want to take a guess on what Maddie's true name is before I keep reading? Chapter 21. It began with the tiniest sensation. It was different from the larger feelings that still racked his body, the searing agony in his arms and hands, the almost unendurable ulceration of his parched mouth, and the feverish pounding of his head. There was a whispered hint of power. He felt it in the tips of his fingers, in the whorls and crevices of his outer skin. It moved across his hands as they lay motionless in the mud. Though he shivered from illness and anguish, he could sense his blood beginning to warm and flow. He lay still. Inside him, the thick, dark liquid slid sinuously through his veins. It entered his heart and throbbed there, moving with purpose through the labyrinth of muscle, collecting energy that came faintly to it from his collapsing lungs. He could feel it surge into his arteries. Within the blood itself, he could perceive its separate cells and see their colors in his consciousness and the prisms of their molecules, and all of it was awake now, gathering power. He could feel his own nerves, each one, millions of them, taut with energy waiting to be released. The fibers of his muscles tightened. Gasping, Maddie called for his gift to come. There was no sense of how to direct it. He simply clawed at the earth, feeling the power in his hands enter, pulsating into the ruined world. He became aware suddenly that he had been chosen for this. Near him, Kira began to breathe more easily. What had been close to coma now turned to sleep. Not far away, Leader tentatively lifted one foot and found it free of the entangling vine. He opened his eyes. Back in village, a breeze came up. It came through the windows of the home place where Raymond lived with his family. Raymond sat up suddenly in the bed where he had lain ill for days and felt the fever begin to seep from him. The blind man sensed the breeze entering the open windows and lifting an edge of the tapestry on the wall. He felt the fabric and found the stitches as even and smooth as they had been in the past. Maddie groaned and pressed his hands harder into the ground. All of his strength and blood and breath were entering the earth now. His brain and spirit became part of the earth. He rose. He floated above, weightless, watching his human self labor and writhe. He gave himself to it willingly, trading himself for all that he loved and valued, and felt free. Leader walked forward. He wiped his face with his hands and felt the lesions fade, as if they had been cleansed away. He could see the path clearly now, for the bushes had drawn back. their leaves bright with new green growth and dappled with buds. A yellow butterfly lit on a bush, paused, and darted off. Rounded stones bordered the path, and sunlight filtered down through the canopy of trees. The air was fresh, and he could hear a stream flowing nearby. Maddie could see and hear everything. He saw Jean, beside her garden, call out in happy greeting to her father, and he saw Mentor, stooped once more and balding, wave to her from the path where he was walking toward the schoolhouse with a book in his hand. His face was stained again with the birthmark, and poetry had returned to him. Maddie heard him recite, "Today the road all runners come, shoulder high we bring you home, and set you at your threshold down, townsman of a stiller town." He saw the wall builders walk away from their work. He heard the new ones singing in their own languages, 100 different tongues, but they understood one another. He saw the scarred woman standing proudly in their midst beside her son, and the people of village gathered to listen. He saw Forest and understood what Seer had meant. It was an illusion. It was a tangled knot of fears and deceits and dark struggles for power that had disguised itself and almost destroyed everything. Now it was unfolding, like a flower coming into bloom, radiant with possibility. Drifting there, he looked down and saw his own self becoming motionless. He felt his breathing slow. He sighed, let go, and felt a sense of peace. He watched Kira wake, and he saw Leader find her there. Kira took a cloth to the stream and brought it back, moistened to wash Maddie's still face. Leader had turned him over. She sobbed at the sight of him, but was glad that his terrible wounds were gone. She bathed his arms and hands. The skin was firm and unblemished, without scars. "I knew him when he was a little boy," she said, weeping. "He always had a dirty face and a mischievous spirit." She smoothed his hair. He called himself the fiercest of the fierce. Leader smiled. He was that, but it was not his true name. Kira wiped her eyes. He so hoped to receive his true name at the end of this journey. He would have. He wanted to be messenger, Kira confided. Leader shook his head. "No, there have been other messengers, and there will be more to come." He leaned down and placed his hand solemnly on Maddie's forehead above the closed eyes. "Your true name is Healer," he said. A sudden rustling in the bushes startled them both. "What's that?" Kira asked in alarm. At her voice, the puppy, his fur matted with twigs, emerged from the place where he had been hiding. "It's Frolic!" Kira took him into her arms and he licked her hands. Beside her, tenderly, Leader picked up what remained of the boy and prepared to carry him home. In the distance, the sound of keening began. Well, that brings us to the end of Messenger. I thought it was going to be a bit longer. That means the fourth book is considerably bigger. Considerably bigger. We'll start on that this evening too, since we still have a full half hour left, if not a bit more. What did you guys think of that ending, though, of Messenger? I have read this book, this series, a long time ago, and so, I'm getting, little bits that come back to me as I read, and I felt like I remembered kind of how this one ended, and I wasn't 100% sure. I was mostly right, but, I had completely forgotten what his true name was. But, yeah. I liked the ending of that one. I really did. I really did. All right, well, so we'll go ahead and we'll get started then on the fourth and final book of this quartet, which is called Sun, S-O-N, not S-U-N. And again, if you guys missed the previous readings, of the rest of Messenger. You can find it on my YouTube channel. You just go and just catch up, and then we'll get started on this next one. So the next one is called Sun. There we go. Book 1. Before. Chapter 1. The young girl cringed when they buckled the eyeless leather mask around the upper half of her face and blinded her. It felt grotesque and unnecessary, but she didn't object. It was the procedure. She knew that. One of the other vessels had described it to her at lunch a month before. Mask? She had asked in surprise, almost chuckling at the strange image. What's the mask for? Well, it's not really a mask. The young woman seated on her left corrected herself and took another bite of the crisp salad. It's a blindfold, actually. She was whispering. They were not supposed to discuss this among themselves. Blindfold? She had asked in astonishment, then laughed apologetically. I don't seem to be able to converse, do I? I keep repeating what you say, but blindfold? Why? They don't want you to see the product when it comes out of you, when you birth it. The girl pointed to her bulging belly. You've produced already, right? She asked her. The girl nodded. Twice. What's it like? Even asking it, she knew it was a somewhat foolish question. They had had classes, seen diagrams, been given instructions. Still, none of that was the same as hearing it from someone who had actually gone through the process. And now that they were already disobeying the restriction about discussing it, well, why not ask? Easier the second time. Didn't hurt as much. When she didn't respond, the girl looked at her quizzically. Hasn't anyone told you it hurts? They said discomfort. The other girl gave a sarcastic snort. Discomfort, then, if that's what they want to call it. Not as much discomfort the second time, and it doesn't take as long. Vessels? Vessels! The voice of the matron through the speaker was stern. Monitor your conversations, please. You know the rules. The girl and her companion obediently fell silent, realizing that they had been heard through the microphones embedded in the walls of the dining room. Some of the other girls giggled. They were probably also guilty. There was so little else to talk about. The process, their job, their mission, was the thing they had in common, but the conversation shifted after the stern warning. She had taken another spoonful of soup. Food in the birth mother's dormitory was always plentiful and delicious. The vessels were all being meticulously nourished. Of course, growing up in the community, she had always been adequately fed. Food had been delivered to her family's dwelling each day. But when she had been selected birth mother at 12, the course of her life had changed. It had been gradual. The academic courses, math, science, law, at school became less demanding for her group. Fewer tests, less reading required. The teachers paid little attention to her. Courses in nutrition and health had been added to her curriculum, and more time was spent on exercise in the outdoor air. Special vitamins had been added to her diet. Her body had been examined, tested, and prepared for her time here. After that year had passed, and part of another, she was deemed ready. She was instructed to leave her family dwelling and move to the birth mother's dormitory. Relocating from one place to another within the community was not difficult. She owned nothing. Her clothing was distributed and laundered by the central clothing supply. Her school books were requisitioned by the school and would be used for another student the following year. The bicycle she had ridden to school throughout her earlier years was taken to be refurbished and given to a different, younger child. There was a celebratory dinner her last evening in the dwelling. Her brother, older by 6 years, had already gone on to his own training in the Department of Law and Justice. They saw him only at public meetings. He had become a stranger. So the last dinner was just the three of them, she and the parental unit who had raised her. They reminisced a bit. They recalled some funny incidents from her early childhood. A time she had thrown her shoes into the bushes and had come home from the child care center barefoot. There was laughter, and she thanked them for the years of her upbringing. "Were you embarrassed when I was selected for birth mother?" she asked them. She had, herself, secretly hoped for something more prestigious. At her brother's selection, when she had been just 6, they had all been very proud. Law and justice was reserved for those of especially keen intelligence, but she had not been a top student. "No," her father said, "we trust the committee's judgment. They knew what you would do best." "And birth mother is very important," Mother added. "Without birth mothers, none of us would be here." Then they wished her well in the future. Their lives were changing too. Parents no longer, they would move now into the place where childless adults lived. The next day she walked alone to the dormitory attached to the birthing unit and moved into the small bedroom she was assigned. From its window she could see the school she had attended and the recreation field beyond. In the distance there was a glimpse of the river that bordered the community. Finally, several weeks later, after she was settled in and beginning to make friends among the other girls, she was called in for insemination. Not knowing what to expect, she had been nervous, but when the procedure was complete, she felt relieved. It had been quick and painless. "Is that all?" she had asked in surprise, rising from the table when the technician gestured that she should. "That's all. Come back next week to be tested and certified." She had laughed, nervously. She wished they had explained everything more clearly in the instruction folder they had given her when she was selected. "What does certified mean?" she asked. The worker, putting away the insemination equipment, seemed a little rushed. There were probably others waiting. "Once they're sure it implanted," he explained impatiently, "then you're certified a vessel." "Anything else?" he asked her as he turned to leave. "No? You're free to go then." That all seemed such a short time ago. Now here she was, 9 months later, with the blindfold strapped around her eyes. The discomfort had started some hours before, intermittently. Now it was non-stop. She breathed deeply as they had instructed. It was difficult, blinded like this. Her skin was hot inside the mask. She tried to relax, to breathe in and out, to ignore the discomfort. "No," she thought, "it is pain. It really is pain." Gathering her strength for the job, she groaned slightly, arched her back, and gave herself up to the darkness. Her name was Claire. She was 14 years old. This has very Handmaid's Tale vibes to it, I think. If I remember correctly. Chapter 2. They clustered around her. She could hear them. When her mind was able to focus through the surging intermittent pain, they were talking urgently to each other. Something was wrong. Again and again they checked her with their instruments, metallic and cold. A cuff on her arm was inflated, and someone pressed a metal disc there at her elbow. Then a different device against her stretched and shaking belly. She gasped as another convulsive pain ripped through her. Her hands were tied on either side of the bed. She was unable to move. Was it supposed to be like this? She tried to ask, but her voice was too weak, mumbly and scared, and no one heard. "Help me," she whispered. She whimpered, but their attention, she sensed, was not on her. Not really. They were worried about the product. Their hands and tools were on her taut middle. It had been hours now since all this began. The first twinge, then the rhythmic, hardening pain, and later the buckling on of the mask. "Put her out. We'll have to go in for it." It was a commanding voice, clearly someone in charge. "Quickly." There was a startling urgency to it. "Breathe deeply," they ordered her, shoving something rubbery up under the mask, holding it to her mouth and nose. She did. She had no choice. She would have suffocated otherwise. She inhaled something with an unpleasantly sweet scent, and immediately the pain subsided. Her thoughts subsided. Her being drifted away. Her last sensation was the awareness, pain-free, of something cutting into her belly, carving her. She emerged to a new, different pain. No longer the throbbing agony, but now a broad, deep ache. She felt freed and then realized that her wrists were unshackled. She was still on the bed, covered with a warm blanket. Metal rails had been lifted with a clanking sound, so she was protected on either side. The room was empty now. No attendants, no technicians, no equipment. Only Claire, alone. She turned tentatively, assessing the emptiness of the room with her eyes, and then tried to lift her head but was forced back by the pain the attempt caused. She couldn't look down at her own body, but carefully moved her hands to rest there on what had been her own taut, swollen belly. It was flat now, bandaged and very sore. The product was what they had carved out of her, and she missed it. She was suffused with a desperate feeling of loss. "You've been decertified." 3 weeks had passed. She had recuperated in the birthing unit for the first week, tended and checked, pampered a bit, actually, she realized, but there was an awkwardness to everything. There with her were other young women recovering, so there was pleasant conversation, a few jokes about being slender again. Their bodies, hers as well, were massaged each morning, and their gentle exercise was supervised by the staff. Her recuperation was slower, though, than the others, for she had been left with a wound, and they had not. After the first week, they were moved to an interim place, where they amused themselves with talk and games before returning 2 weeks later to the large, familiar group of vessels. Back they went to the dormitory, greeting old friends, many of them larger in size now, their bellies growing as they waited, and taking their places again in the group. They all looked alike, in their shapeless, smock-like dresses, with their identical haircuts, but personalities distinguished them. Nadia was funny, making a joke of everything. Miriam, very solemn and shy. Suzanne was organized and efficient. As vessels returned following production, there was surprisingly little talk of the task. "How did it go?" someone would ask, and the reply would be a nonchalant shrug and, "All right, fairly easy," or a wry, "Not too bad," with a face indicating that it had not been pleasant. "Good to have you back." "Thanks. How were things here while I was gone?" "The same. 2 new vessels, just arrived, and Nancy's gone." "What did she get?" "Farm." "Good. She wanted that." It was casual talk, inconsequential. Nancy had delivered her 3rd product not long before. After the 3rd, the vessels were reassigned. Farm, clothing factory, food delivery. Claire remembered that Nancy had hoped for farm. She liked the outdoors, and a particular friend of hers had been assigned farm some months before. She hoped to spend the next part of her working life in the company of someone she enjoyed. Claire felt happy for her. But she was apprehensive about her own future. Although her memory was hazy, she knew that something had gone wrong at her own production. It was clear that no one else had ended up with a wound. She had tried somewhat shyly to ask the others, those who had produced more than once, but they seemed shocked and confused by her questions. "Is your belly still sore?" Claire whispered to Miriam, who had been in the recuperation place with her. "Sore? No," Miriam had replied. They were sitting beside each other at breakfast. "Mine is. Just where the scar is when I press on it," Claire explained, touching her hand gently to the place. "Scar?" Miriam had made a face. "I don't have a scar." She turned away and joined another conversation. Claire tried again, carefully asking a few other vessels, but no one had a scar. No one had a wound. After a while, her own ache subsided, and she tried to ignore the uneasy awareness that something had gone very wrong. Then she was called in. "Claire," the voice from the speaker announced at midday while the vessels were eating, "please report to the office immediately after lunch." Flustered, Claire looked around. Across the table was Alyssa, a special friend. They had been selected the same year, both 12s at the same time, and so she had known Alyssa through her school years. But Alyssa was newer here. She had not been inseminated as soon as Claire. Now she was in the early stages of her first production. "What's that about?" Alyssa asked her when they heard the directive. I don't know. Did you do something wrong? Claire frowned. I don't think so. Maybe I forgot to fold my laundry. They wouldn't call you in for that, would they? I don't think so. It's so minor. Well, Alyssa said, beginning to stack her empty dishes, you'll find out soon enough. It's probably nothing. See you later. She left Claire still sitting at the table. But it was not nothing. Claire stood facing them in dismay as the committee told her of their decision. She had been decertified. Gather your things, they told her. You'll be moved this afternoon. Why? She asked. Was it because... Well, I could tell something went wrong, but They were kind, solicitous. It wasn't your fault. What wasn't my fault? She asked, aware that she shouldn't press them but unable to stop herself. If you could just explain... The committee head shrugged. These things happen. A physical problem. It should have been detected sooner. You should not have been inseminated. Who was your first examiner? He asked. I don't remember her name. Well, we'll find out. Let's hope it was her first error, so that she will have another chance. They dismissed her then, but she turned at the door because she could not leave without asking. My product? He looked at her dismissively, then relented. He turned to another committee member near him at the table and nodded to the papers in front of her, directing her to look up the information. What number was it? The woman asked him, but he ignored the question. Well, she said, I'll check by name. You're Claire? As if they didn't know. They had summoned her here by name. But she nodded. She moved her finger down a page. Yes, here you are. Claire, product number 36. Oh yes, I see the notations about the difficulties. She looked up. Claire touched her own belly, remembering. The woman returned the paper to the pile and tapped the edges of the stack to make it tidy. He's fine, she said. The committee head glared at her. She corrected herself. I meant that it's fine. The medical difficulties didn't affect it. You'll be fine too, Claire, she added, affably. Where am I going? Claire asked. Suddenly she was frightened. They hadn't yet said she was being reassigned, just decertified, so she would no longer be a birth mother. That made sense. Her body had not performed that function well. But what if decertified people were simply released, the way failures often were? But their reply was reassuring. Fish hatchery, the committee head told her. You're being moved there. They need help. They're short of workers. Your training will begin in the morning. You'll have to catch up. Luckily, you have a quick mind. He dismissed her now with a wave of his hand, and Claire went back to the dormitory to gather her few things. It was rest time. The other vessels were all napping, the doors of their cubicle-like rooms closed. She thought as she packed the few personal items that she had. It was a he. I produced a baby boy. I had a son. The feeling of loss overwhelmed her again. I feel bad for Claire. Chapter 3. You'll be issued a bicycle. The man, his name tag said Dimitri, hatchery supervisor, gestured toward the area where bicycles were standing in racks. He had met her at the door, unsurprised by her arrival. Obviously, he had been notified that she was on her way. Claire nodded. Confined to the birthing unit and its surrounding grounds for over a year now, she had not needed any kind of transportation. And she had walked here, carrying her small case of belongings from the birth mother's area to the northeast. It wasn't far, and she knew the route, but after so many months, everything seemed new and unfamiliar. She had passed the school and saw children at their required exercise in the recreation field. None seemed to recognize her, though they looked curiously at the young woman walking along the path at midday. It was unusual. Most people were at their jobs. Those who needed to be out and about were on bicycles, making their way from one building to another. No one walked. A small girl with hair ribbons grinned at Claire from the exercise routine and waved surreptitiously. Claire smiled back, remembering her own beribboned days, but an instructor called sharply to the child, who made a face and turned back to the assigned calisthenics. Across the central plaza she caught a glimpse, in the dwelling area, of the small house where she had grown up. Other people would live there now. Couples newly assigned to each other, perhaps waiting for... She averted her eyes from the nurturing center. It was, she knew, where the products were taken after birthing, usually in groups, every morning, most often. Once, sleepless at dawn, she had watched from the window of her cubicle and seen 4 products, tucked into baskets, loaded onto a 2-wheeled cart attached to the back of a bicycle. After checking their security in the cart, the birthing attendant had ridden off toward the nurturing center to deliver them there. She wondered if her own product, her boy, number 36, had been taken to the nurturing center yet. Claire knew that they waited, sometimes days, occasionally weeks, making certain that everything was going well, that the products were healthy, to make the transfer. Well, she sighed, time to put it out of her mind. She walked on, past the Hall of Law and Justice. Peter, whom she had once known as a teasing older brother, would be inside, at work. If he glanced through a window and saw a young woman walking slowly past, would he know it was Claire? Would he care? Past the House of Elders, the place where the governing committee lived and studied, past small office buildings, past the bicycle repair shop, and now she could see the river that bordered the community, its dark water moving swiftly, foaming around rocks here and there. Claire had always feared the river. As children, they had been warned of its dangers. She had known of a young boy who had drowned. There were rumors, likely untrue, of citizens who had swum across, or even made their way across the high, forbidden bridge and disappeared into the unknown lands beyond. But she was fascinated by it too, its constant murmur and movement, and the mystery of it. She crossed the bike path, waiting politely until 2 young women had pedaled by. To her left she could see the shallow fish-holding ponds, and remembered how, as younger children, she and her friends had watched the silvery creatures darting about. Now she would be working here, at the hatchery, and living here too, she assumed, at least until when? Citizens were given dwellings when they were assigned spouses. Birth mothers never had spouses, so she had not thought about it until now. Now she wondered, was she eligible now for a spouse, and eventually for... Claire sighed. It was troubling and confusing to think about such things. She turned away from the holding ponds, made her way to the front door of the main building, and was met there by Dmitri. That night, alone in the small bedroom she'd been assigned, Claire looked down from her window to the darkened, surging river below. She yawned. It had been a long and exhausting day. This morning she had awakened in her familiar surroundings, the place where she had lived for so many months, but by midday her entire life had shifted. She had not had a chance to say goodbye to her friends, the other vessels. They would be wondering where she had gone, but would likely forget her soon. She had taken her place here, been issued a name tag, and been introduced to the other workers. They seemed pleasant enough. Some, older than Claire, had spouses and dwellings, and left at the end of the day's work. Others, like herself, lived here, in the rooms along the corridor. One, Heather, had been the same year as Claire. She had been a 12 at the same ceremony. Surely she would remember Claire's assignment as birth mother. Her eyes flickered in recognition when they were introduced, but Heather said nothing. Neither did Claire. There was really nothing to say. She supposed that she and the younger workers, including Heather, would become friends, of a sort. They would sit together at meals and go in groups to attend community entertainments. After a while, they would have shared jokes, probably things about fish, phrases that would make them chuckle. It had been that way with the other vessels, and Claire found herself missing, already, the easy camaraderie among them. But she would fit in here. Everyone welcomed her cheerfully and said they'd be glad of her help. The work wouldn't be hard. She'd been allowed to watch the lab attendants, in gowns and gloves, strip eggs from what they called the breeder fish, anesthetized females. A little like squeezing toothpaste, she thought, amused at the image. Nearby, other attendants squeezed what they told her was milt from the male, and then they added the creamy substance to the container that held the fresh eggs. It had to be very precisely timed, they explained, and antiseptic. They worried about contamination and bacteria. The temperature made a difference as well. Everything was carefully controlled. In a nearby room, lit by dim red lights, she had watched another gloved worker look through trays of stacked fertilized eggs. "See those spots?" the worker had asked Claire. She pointed to the tray of glistening pink eggs. Claire peered down and saw that most of them had 2 dark spots. She nodded. "Eyes," the girl told her. "Oh," Claire said, amazed that already, so young and tiny that she could hardly think of it as a fish, it had eyes. "See here?" Using a metal tool, the girl pointed at a discolored, eyeless egg. "This one's dead." Carefully, she plucked it from the tray with her forceps and discarded it in the sink. Then she turned the tray to its rack, and reached for the next one. "Why did it die?" Claire asked. She found that she was whispering. The room was so dimly lit, so quiet and cool, that her voice was hushed. But the worker replied in a normal tone, very matter-of-fact. "I don't know. The insemination went wrong, I guess." She shrugged and removed another dead egg from the second tray. "We have to take them out so they don't contaminate the good ones. I check them every day." Claire felt a vague discomfort. The insemination had gone wrong. Was that what had happened to her? Had her product, like the discolored, eyeless egg, been thrown aside someplace? But no, they had told her that number 36 was fine. She tried to set aside her troubling thoughts and pay attention to the worker's voice and explanations. "Claire?" The door opened and it was Dimitri, the supervisor, looking for her. "I want to show you the dining room, and they have your schedule almost ready to give you." So she had continued the tour of the facility, and had been instructed in her next day's duties. Cleaning, mostly. Everything had to be kept spotless. And later she had had supper with a group of the workers who lived, as she would now, at the hatchery. They talked mostly about what they had done during recreation time. There was an hour allotted each day when they could do whatever they liked. Someone mentioned a bike ride and a picnic lunch along the river. Apparently the kitchen staff would pack your lunch in a basket if you asked in advance. 2 young men had joined a ball game. Someone had watched repairs being done on the bridge. It was aimless, pleasant chat, but it served to remind Claire that she was freer now than she had been in a long time. She could go for a walk after lunch, she thought, or in the evening. Later, in her room, thinking, she realized what she wanted to do when she had time. Not just an ordinary walk. She wanted to try to find a girl named Sophia, a girl her own age, a girl who had turned 12 when Claire did. They had not been particular friends, just acquaintances and schoolmates who had happened to share a birth year. But Sophia had been seated next to Claire at the ceremony when they were given their assignments. "Birth mother," the chief elder had announced when it was Claire's turn to stand and be acknowledged. She had shaken the chief elder's hand, smiled politely at the audience, taken her official assignment papers, and gone back to her seat. Sophia had stood next. "Nurturer," the chief elder had named Sophia. It had meant little to Claire then, but now it meant that Sophia, an assistant at first, probably by now fully trained, was working in the nurturing center, the place where Claire's product, her child, her baby, was being held and fed. Days passed. Claire waited for the right time. Usually the workers took their breaks in pairs or groups. People would wonder if she wandered off alone during a break. There would be murmurs about her and questions. She didn't want that. She needed them to see her as hard-working and responsible, as someone ordinary, someone without secrets. So she waited, worked, and began to fit in. She made friends. One lunchtime she joined several co-workers in a picnic along the riverbank. They leaned their bikes against nearby trees and sat on some flat rocks in the high grass while they unpacked the prepared food. Nearby, on the path, two young boys rode by on their bikes, laughing at something, and waved to them. "Hey, look!" one boy was pointing. "Supply boat!" Eagerly the two youngsters dropped their bikes and scrambled down the sloping riverbank to watch as the barge-like boat passed, its open deck heavy with wooden containers of various sizes. Rolf, one of the picnickers, looked at his watch and then at the boys. "They're going to be late getting back to school," he commented with a wry smile. The others all chuckled. Now that they were finished with school, it was easy to be amused by the regulations that they had all lived by as children. "I was late once," Claire told them, "because a groundskeeper sliced his hand when he was pruning the bushes over by the central offices. I stopped and watched while they bandaged him and took him off to the infirmary for stitches. I used to hope I'd be assigned nursing assistant," she added. There was an awkward silence for a moment. Claire wasn't certain if they knew her background. Undoubtedly there had been some explanation given for her sudden appearance at the hatchery, but probably they had been told no details. To have failed at one's assignment, to be reassigned, had something of a shame to it. No one would ever mention it, if they did know. No one would ask. "Well, the committee knows best," Edith commented primly as she passed sandwiches around. "Anyway, there's an element of nursing at the hatchery. All the labs and procedures." Claire nodded. "Hatchery wouldn't have been my first choice," a tall young man named Eric said. "I was really hoping for law and justice." "My brother's there," Claire told him. "Does he like it?" Eric asked with interest. Claire shrugged. "I guess so. I never see him. He was older. Once he finished his training, he moved away from our dwelling. He might even have a spouse by now." "You'd know that," Rolf pointed out. "You see the spouse assignments at the ceremony." "I've applied for a spouse," he added, grinning. "I had to fill out about 1,000 forms." Claire didn't tell them that she had not attended the last two ceremonies. Birth mothers did not leave their quarters during their years of production. Claire had never seen a vessel until she became one. She had not known, until she had both experienced and observed it, that human females swelled and grew and reproduced. No one had told her what birth meant. "Look," Eric said suddenly, "the supply boat's stopping at the hatchery. Good. I put in an order quite a while ago." He glanced down at the riverbank, where the two youngsters were still standing, watching the boat. "Boys!" he called. When they looked up, he pointed to the watch on his own wrist. "The school bell is going to ring in less than 5 minutes." Reluctantly, they climbed back up the bank and went to retrieve their bikes. "Thank you for the reminder," one said politely to Eric. "You think the supply boat will still be there after school?" the other boy asked eagerly. But Eric shook his head. "They unload quickly," he told the boy, who looked disappointed. "I wish I could be a boat worker," they could hear one boy say to the other as they set their bikes upright. "I bet they go lots of places we don't even know about. I bet if I were working on a supply boat, I'd get to see—" "If we don't get back on time," his friend said nervously, "we're not going to be assigned anything. Come on, let's get going." The boys rowed away toward the school building in the distance. "I wonder what he thought they'd get to see as a boat worker," Rolf commented. They began to tidy up the picnic and to pack away the uneaten food. Other places, other communities, the boats must make a lot of stops. Eric folded the napkins and placed them in the basket. They'd all be the same. What's so exciting about seeing a different hatchery, a different school, a different nurturing center, a different— Edith interrupted them. "It's pointless to speculate," she said in her terse, businesslike tone. "Accomplishes nothing. Wondering is very likely against the rules, though I suppose it isn't a serious infringement." Eric rolled his eyes and handed Rolf the basket. "Here," he said, "strap this on your bike and take it back, would you? I have to do an errand. I told the lab chief that I'd pick up some stuff at the supply center." Rolf, attaching the basket to his bike by its transportation straps, commented, "It might be nice to travel on the river, though, just for the trip. Fun to see new things. Even," he said facetiously, "if you haven't wondered about them." Edith ignored that. "Could be dangerous," Eric pointed out. "That water's deep." He looked around, making sure they had collected everything. "Ready to go back?" Claire and Edith nodded and moved their bikes to the path. Eric waved and rode off on his errand. Even if it might be against the rules, some kind of infringement. It would be hard to know it without studying the thick book of community regulations, though it was always available on the monitor in the hatchery lobby. But there were pages and pages of very small print, and no one ever bothered to look at it, as far as Claire could tell. There would be no way for anyone to get caught in the act of wondering, Claire thought. It was an invisible thing, like a secret. She herself spent a great deal of time at it, wondering. Pedaling back, she rehearsed in her mind, silently, how easy it would be to say in a casual voice, "I have to run an errand." How she could slip away. It wouldn't take long, and ride over to the nurturing center to find Sophia and ask some questions. All right. That will bring us to a conclusion for our read this evening. Thank you all so very much for finishing another book with me and starting a new one, even though obviously we're still reading from the same book. So for anyone who's new, this book basically all ties back in together in one universe in a way. So I mean, the books kind of sort of interlock with each other in a way, if you hadn't picked up on that yet, or if you're brand new and you're just listening to this snippet for the first time. So I'm going to be curious. I don't remember the fourth book at all. I don't remember the fourth book at all, really. So I don't remember if by the end of this story, like, we touch back on the first three books. I don't know if it sets us up for another series that kind of is in the same universe. I'm not sure, but I'm excited to see where this last book takes us, and I hope you guys come along with me on the conclusion of this journey. And this is probably going to take us 3 weeks to read, maybe. Probably another 3 Mondays to get through the rest of it. And then we'll start on something new. So if you guys have any suggestions or anything specific that you would like for me to read, or something that you would like me to check out. Oh, good job, Miss Deborah. You stayed awake. Good job. So yeah, if you guys have any books that you would like me to check out, or if there's any series that you would like for me to read from next, please send me a message. Just hit me up in my DMs and I'll check them out and see what we can do for our next book reading when we're done with this one. So until then, you guys stay safe, stay hydrated, and I will see you next Monday. Bye. Oh, right. And happy Father's Day ahead of time, since it's on this coming Sunday. So if you are a dad, or if you have a dad, or you had a dad, or if you are a dad replacement, happy Father's Day. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay, good. Yeah. If you are a dad, happy Father's Day. If you have a dad, happy Father's Day to them. Happy Heavenly Father's Day to all the dads who aren't with us anymore. So, I hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you next time. Bye.